Good evening, I'm Leonard Harry for TAMAPTA. Tonight we will be viewing Reindeer Station as it was in the late 1960s. Gerald Falk, pastor of Inuvialuit Christian Assembly, talks about and remembers the good times the people of the small community had before its closing in 1967.
I see you have a picture of Reindeer Station here. Can you tell me about some of the buildings?
This was Reindeer Station in its last days. The church was situated right here, and then the rest of the buildings had been moved together to make a square. The school was situated here at the end. Previously it was over beyond the buildings to that side, but they moved it into here to centralize it. Jimmy Gordon's house was here. Upsamix, Cayutux, Pokiak, and Leacock, and Polks, and the teacher, Mr. Baker, lived in this house over here, pardon me, and this was the station chief, Mr. Johansson, and Danny Sidney. This was the local store, the Hudson Bay Company, and Billy Kickwalk lived here, and this big house here was mine, and I guess that's the main buildings. Over here was the shop, the workshops here, and this building here they called the Igloo, and it was really the community hall, I suppose, in modern day terms. It's where we had all our meetings, and in the wintertime the church was too cold to use, so we would always use that building. I just remember one experience now looking at this picture about services in Reindeer Station. It was about 45 to 50 below. It was a miserably cold day, and there was just one heater there, and it was Sunday morning, and we had both heaters going on in the building, but it was so cold. It was just freezing cold in there. It was just like it was nothing, but it didn't hinder people in those days to come out to service. And I remember having to use my gloves, and everybody sat with their parkas and mitts on for the service that morning. It was so cold, but it was interesting, and nobody seemed to complain about it at all. They came anyway. But that was Reindeer Station. This was the trail here, what we used to take off and run and come through the tanks and then up here to Summerhill, and that's where everybody used to walk up how many times a day just to look around the country from up on the hill. It was very high.
When was your first year down at Reindeer Station, and how did you get down there?
I went to Reindeer Station in the early winter of 1966. It would have been the first part of December, and I was invited to go down there by the people of Reindeer Station, and one day Sven Johansson, the station chief, was here in Inuvik with his small plane, and he gave me a phone call and asked me if I was ready to go. So I just had my suitcase, so I grabbed it and away we went on his small aircraft. I remember the flight going down. I hadn't been on a small craft too much, and I didn't know there was downdraft winds along the hills of Reindeer Station, and we had one real bumpy ride, but I learned that was just normal procedure going down to Reindeer Station. But I got there about first part of December of '66.
Can you tell me about some of the sports that they had down there? Anytime
through Christmas, Easter, or July the 1st used to be the main sports events of the year. July 1st, they would have lots of races for the kids, like sack races, three-legged races, ordinary 50-yard, 100-yard runs. And for the adults or young fellows, they used to have a race that went up Summerhill, and then around over the top of Summerhill, and then down Slaughter Hill and back to Reindeer Station. I think they got about 50 or 75 cents for first prize, so it wasn't the money. But everybody used to do it just to have a good time and just to compete together and enjoy each other. I can remember running Summerhill. Melser Sidney used to come over to my place every once in a while, and he'd say, let's go for a run in the evening. So we used to take a run up Summerhill, and we used to just run non-stop, bottom to top. I don't think I could walk the hill now hardly, but used to do it then, no problem at all. And everybody used to go up and down Summer Hill. There was a regular trail going up and down there. And then at Easter time there was the dog team races, and people would come in from all over the bush and bring their teams in and have a race. There'd be probably 12 or more teams that would compete. And I competed in that, and just the fact that I had a ride as the extra passenger. They wanted somebody that was skinny and didn't weigh too much, and I happened to fit that bill at that time, so they put me on one of them, and I traveled as his passenger, and we went 10 miles, I believe it was, along the hills and then back again. And that was always a lot of fun, and everybody just had a good time. And Christmas time, they used to gather in the church for a big feast. We were so few families that everybody just would come as one great big happy family together, and nobody cooked just an individual Christmas meal, but everybody got together and they just put some oilcloth down the middle of the church floor, and everybody brought something, and we just had one big feast on Christmas Day with everybody together. And then the rest of the time they played. They had arm pulls and all the rest of the games that they played. They would go well into the night and sometimes into the early part of the next day, and then they sleep for a while and then get up and start all over again. But it was really an enjoyable time, and we had a lot of fun, and it was interesting. And it was really interesting to me because I was all new there, and so I really enjoyed it.
Can you tell me about the good times that you had at Reindeer Station?
No. Oh, they were all fun. But I remember probably in the evenings, sometimes there was not much to do, and so for a bit of excitement, a bunch of us would borrow somebody's dog's sled, and up we'd go. We'd pull it up Slaughter Hill and get everybody on board, just pile in as many as we could into the sled, and then one guy would steer it, and we'd see if we could make it down the crooked trail and not miss, or at least miss the willows. And if you were successful, you could go clean down, all the way down through the valley and then out through the settlement and even cross the river. You'd end up on the other side of the river. Mind you, you probably didn't take any more trips than that down. It was a long ways to go back. And other times you weren't so successful. You maybe missed a turn, or the guy who was steering, it was too big a load on, he couldn't quite put the turn on that you needed, and then it was into the willows. And I remember one time going straight up a pile of willows, just straight up, and then back down, and we all were one mangled pile down below. But amazingly, nobody got hurt. That was some of the main events I can remember offhand, anyway.
Can you tell me about the church?
The church started at probably in the late 50s and early 60s, maybe between 58 and 61. I'm not really sure the exact date. And the people of the community, the men that were herders, band together with the permission of the station chief at that time, and I just forget his name, but they went out and found the logs, the suitable size logs that they wanted for the building, and brought them all into the community. And after they had them all gathered, Neil Allen and Albert Oliver were the fellows that actually put them together and made the building. It was a beautiful building. It was all logs packed with moss in between the logs for insulation, and an old 45-gallon drum stove in the back. It didn't cost them very much. I think they told me that it was just the plywood and the windows that they had to pay for, and everybody pitched in and lent a helping hand and built the building. So it was really a nice building, and I enjoyed having my final services there, and that's what I'll remember.
Where did Neil and Alan come from?
I believe he come from Alaska was his home.
You don't know where, eh?
I'm not sure where it was. It was probably Barrow or Koktovik area.
How did you feel when you were shutting down Reindeer Station?
Well, I hadn't been there that long when we got news that the project had been turned over to Canadian Wildlife and that they operated out of Inuvik, so the project was going to have to move from Reindeer Station to Inuvik. There was mixed feelings. I remember a lot of people didn't want to move at all. Like they had lived there, and it was a nice, peaceful settlement. It was no drinking in the community at all, so it was really a quiet settlement and a family-type atmosphere. Everybody got along just like one big happy family. And so when the news came that everybody was going to have to go their several ways, there was really a lot of emotion, and people just didn't want to move, but had no choice. If they wanted a job, they were going to have to move to Inuvik, and the thought of going to a big community kind of frightened some of them because it was such a small community. But I can remember it being, I think it was just Danny Sidney and Jimmy Gordon left in the community, and Jimmy took me back with his speedboat to Inuvik sometime in July, and I just had really mixed feelings when I left. I had one great big lump in my throat, and I remember sitting in the boat and looking back and watching Reindeer Station slowly fading off into the distance. And of course, then when we got around the point there, that was the end of it. And I remember shedding a few tears as I traveled down the river that day. And some of my best memories, probably from the north, were from that small community.
Well, thanks for talking with you.
Thank you.
On August 6, Thomas Smith, Charles Elias, and George Lessard went to Reindeer Station, which is about 30 miles downriver, to talk to Richard Binder about his tourist camp, the past history of Reindeer Station, and future plans to restore the buildings.
Good afternoon. Welcome to Reindeer Station.
And you are?
My name is Richard Binder.
And what time did you think of opening up this camp?
I've actually been thinking about this this type of venture for a number of years. Up until last year, I put in an application with the Inuvialuit Lands Administration to see if I could acquire some property, and preferably the location Reindeer Station, to provide facilities for the people traveling up to the Inuvik area.
When did you start opening and getting tourists into the cirque?
Well, we first came down here for an overnight visit mid-June, and once we got here, nobody wanted to go back to Inuvik, so I went back and picked up more food and other supplies, and then we started building our tent frames. And the requests started coming in early for people wanting to visit Reindeer Station, so we started accommodating them early or late in June.
What do you show them around the town?
Basically, the whole package consists of a departure from Inuvik with my boat. We leave there at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. We arrive here shortly around 2. I bring them in and introduce the rest of the people here. There's my wife and 2 children, and my cousin Haram, Oscar, and Howard Kopak. So we live here, and we basically welcome them into the camp. We have a cup of coffee, and everybody's relaxed. Then I take them around and I explain the history of Reindeer Station. Why was Reindeer Station first established? Then we do a walk-around tour, and I show them the buildings that are presently standing or still standing. A lot have been removed, and a lot have been destroyed. But within time, I hope to eventually make it so that the people could have a very good idea of what Reindeer Station was all about. And after the tour, we provide them with a meal before we leave, and it usually consists of caribou and fish.
Do you serve muktuk with them along with the meal?
Well, I just got my whale a week ago last Friday, and now that the people that have been coming in since then have had an opportunity to try it. So we're trying to make all the northern foods or dishes available to them to try. And our first response are, well, it's not bad, it's different. So hopefully we'll be able to provide dry meat, the whale meat, caribou dry meat, and dry fish, and other products. if anybody wants to try frozen meats and fish, we'll let them try that too.
Can you give us a background of Reindeer Station?
Reindeer Station is basically a winter camp. When they moved the reindeer herd here in around 1935, they delivered the reindeer here. They had several winter camps. One of them was around Inuvialuit and the other one around Holmes Creek. They were not permanent winter camps. They found later on that they required a more permanent winter location that had easier access to Aklavik, being the government center at the time. So back in around 1938, they picked up this location and said, okay, this is where we'll put our winter camp, and this will be our administrative center. The Hudson's Bay moved here in 1949, and along with that came the post office. This place was first known as Reindeer Depot. In the early 60s, a geographer was traveling in Mackenzie or working in the Mackenzie Delta area, and he noticed that all the local people call it Reindeer Station. So he wrote a letter to the branch that was involved with the geographic locations, and he said they looked for a geographic name change. So in 1961, they changed the name officially to Reindeer Station. It was used up until 1968 when they officially closed the place down as their winter camp. They had summer camps along the coast there on Richards Island, and this is basically their winter and administrative center.
Do you know why they shut Reindeer Station down?
They had some administrative problems, and it just wasn't going the way the government had planned the reindeer herd to go. Their initial intention was to have the reindeer divided into smaller, manageable herds that Inuit families could run, but it never came to light. So they eventually decided that they would sell the herd, and they closed Reindeer Station down.
Can you tell me some of your experiences growing up here?
Well, I was born on Richards Island at the summer camp at Inuvialuit Bay. And every summer, once we started school, we would come from Aklavik to here. And we spend the rest of the summer here with our grandparents, Anna and Mikkel Polk. And we'd spend about a week here, and then the rest of the summer would be spent at the summer camp at Inuvialuit Bay.
Can you tell me what activities that used to go on here?
Well, this is a community that I felt was a very close-knit community. They were all here for the same purpose. They're all involved with the reindeer herd. So the families that lived here were very close and a very competitive bunch. They had challenges between the herders, and if it meant skiing down the valley between the two hills here or climbing Summer Hill. But I found that they really did everything all together. They were very sports or athletic minded, and they involved the whole community in their activities.
And can you tell me some things about these buildings or these houses?
Yeah, the ones that are still standing, the ones behind me, there's the old tin shed that they used for storing coal and then eventually just parts and other materials. And beside that was the office. That's where they stored all the information that they collected, all the data that they collected from the harvest, the reindeer harvest, or the annual roundup. So they kept all the data on the annual birth rate and the annual kill and the sex ratio of birth. So that was basically the office for the administration. Beside that was a workshop. That's where they did all the maintenance on whatever machinery they had. So those are three buildings standing toward the lower end of the community. Beside that was an old barn. That was used for the storage of all materials that they had. They transported everything down in the spring to the summer herd camp, and then it all had to be brought back and stored. So they stored all this material in the old barn. It was a massive structure. It was 2 stories, all of log frame, and it is a kind of an impressive building. I hope to eventually restore that building using drift logs as they come down the river and placing them, and then building the building again using old photographs. Beside the barn was a Quonset hut, sort of a igloo-shaped or dome-shaped building, and which was about 40 feet long. They used that, and they had some northern games activity going on in the winter there, and drum dancing. They also had church services in the Quonset hut before they built the log church that used to stand here. Behind all those other buildings, there was the log frame building that's still standing. It was the fish house. That's where they stored the fish for all the dogs they maintained for transport before they got the skidoos or bombardiers. The other building standing close to that area was the old powerhouse. There's just about a third of the building still standing. I had to knock down a portion of the other half because it had a bad lean to it, and I thought it might endanger somebody's life if they walked by and all of a sudden the building gave way. So I got the boys to tear that down, and eventually we hope to restore that too. But so that's basically the buildings at the lower end of the community.
Can you tell me about the ice house here?
Well, the ice house is still usable. The vent had been sealed off for a number of years, but we've opened it up, so now there's some ventilation. So the ice house is still usable. It goes down about 20 feet into the permafrost, and then there's a room approximately 14 by 14 with a 7-foot ceiling. So they used it years ago to keep their summer supply of ice. So they'd take their ice in the spring, and they'd haul it up there, and then they'd have a summer supply of water. They also stored their reindeer meat in there and any other freezables, things that they had to keep frozen, perishables. So we're using it right now, and it's still meat is still frozen. So it's still a usable ice house.
Can you tell me about the building up in the valley?
Well, that was the slaughterhouse. They used that when they had the winter slaughter. They would bring the reindeer that they've killed down to the slaughterhouse, which is, like I said, halfway up the valley, and that's where they'd butcher the meat, and then they'd bring all the meat down to the ice house to keep frozen. It still has a solid foundation. I think a person could fix that building up and use it maybe as a stopover point for skiing or something. They could go up there, walk up there, or maybe eventually we can get a tow up to the slaughterhouse, and they could maybe slide down or ski from there.
And can you tell me about your short-term goals?
For the first 2 or 3 summers, I think I will operate out of a tent camp or a tent frame structure. Eventually, I want to get permanent buildings that I could use year-round, and then eventually open this, rather than being a seasonal operation, I hope to run it year-round. But I'm still going to maintain a certain amount of tents so that people have the opportunity to stay in tents rather than in a building. People may have never stayed in a tent before, so I'm going to give them that opportunity. So I'll still maintain a tent camp, but then eventually I hope to have more permanent buildings that I could use. They'll be easier to heat in the winter, and that way I could operate year-round.
Can you tell me about your long-term goals?
Once I have clearance on the buildings to go ahead and renovate them so that they could be used, I will restore all the buildings that are here that I have access to and make them usable. We could use them as some of them as summer residents, others as a museum, and I'd like to collect all the information on the reindeer industry and the reindeer drive, and get the old photographs from some of the archives, the Hudson's Bay archives, and maybe through the Heritage Center in Yellowknife, and then just have the collection of all the information so that people could see what the place looked like 30 years ago. Years ago, I mean, this place had everything. It had the Hudson's Bay Post, it had the post office, it had a school, it had a church. So it is a self-contained unit. It had its own power plant. So everything was here. It was kind of a shame to see it shut down in '68, but people still have access to Ranger Station. It's along the river and from Inuvik. So people have watched it die, and they've watched it being sort of go to ruin. And there has been a lot of requests to do something with Ranger Station. And I'm just sort of fortunate that I got my foot in the door, and maybe I can do something with the place so that people can enjoy this place again.
I was going to say, do you have anything going for the winter time?
Not right now. It's a very seasonal operation. I don't have any buildings that I could use here in the winter. So once I'm more fully established, I've got to feel the tourist or the use of the area. It's so far we've had 50 visitors here. So it's a good indication that it may go, and I've also got some requests for some winter activity. Maybe cross-country skiing, downhill skiing, that's a possibility. Maybe some, just skidoo trips along the river or up the valley or whatever.
Can you tell me some things about these little buildings?
Well, there are several other buildings here. They're behind the administrator's house. There's two what we call A-frame structures. Those were used as residences. There are 3 A-frame structures still in Ranger Station or on location.
Okay, then thank you, Richard.
Okay, well, thanks to have you here, Tommy. I'm glad you came back to see the place you grew up in.